Hey guys, it's Jang here from ultimaterc.com, trying something new with a build recap for the Tamiya Buggy Champ, which I built for ultimatetamiya.com. And what I'm going to do here is just basically take you through very quickly a summary of the process of building up the vehicle. Every time that I build a vehicle for ultimatetamiya.com, I do a build thread on the forums, and if you haven't had a chance to see that, I'm just going to talk you through the pictures. I don't really do videos of builds because builds tend to be really slow. And what this right here is, it's the Tamiya Buggy Champ. It was it's a recent re-release actually of what was originally called the Rough Rider. The chassis is the SRB chassis, the Special Racing Buggy chassis. It was designed to really mimic the design of the early the 1970s American dune buggy conversions of VW Beetles, and as such it has very realistic twin trailing arm suspension. The arms in the rear are rigid, so you have full camber gain as it moves through its range of motion, and it's just a really classic vehicle. A lot of cast metal parts. Tamiya has been very true to the original, even including the wavy boingy antenna mast on the back, the driver figure and all. It's really a piece of history, and thanks to the fact that Tamiya re-released it for us, you can now get parts for it. A lot of people have, of course, gone on eBay and bought the kits and split them up into pieces. But it's for collectors, it's just a beautiful vehicle. A very early example, in fact, one of the earliest examples of what has become the modern 1/10 scale electric buggy. So now I'm going to take you into the pictures and start just walking you through the build process real quick. And it all starts with the box, and the box art has not changed very much since the original. When you open it up, you're presented with some really olden goodies, including some cast metal parts for the suspension arms and also the transmission halves. Speaking of transmission halves, you start the assembly with the transmission, and what looks like a differential on the lower left actually isn't. It's just a spool. There's no differential in the Buggy Champ. You notice that this kit does come with a full set of ball bearings, which is a very nice addition that they put in there for the 2009 release. Closing up the halves of the transmission was a little bit tricky because the parts did not come out of the mold perfectly. They were a little bit off, so I had to very gently insert the screws little by little, literally just a few rotations each time to get everything to settle in. And then you see down at the bottom the single U-joint coming out. Here's what it looks like when you start to put the rear suspension together. You can see what's sticking out at the bottom are the torsion bars. They're actually torsion springs, and the brass pieces that are on them actually slide back like so, and those become bushings for the rear suspension arms to ride on, and those get set in with a set screw on each side. And similarly for the rear end of the mount, there's a small little axle stub that goes through, and again a set screw. And then the front ends of the torsion bars get connected with this pre-bent piece of brass tubing. Here's the drive shaft / stub axle installed. There's only one joint on here because it's a rigid swing arm, and there's only one bushing that goes, or bearing that goes in the outer end of that. This one really threw me for a loop because the motor is not attached by bolting it in. It's actually clamped from the back. It's those three screws and that clear cover are what are holding the motor in. On the other side, you'll see that there are what look like two screw holes, which would normally be used for, attaching the motor directly to the transmission half, but no, those are used for this nice transparent gear cover. Now, while we're at the rear, assembling together the rear roll bar and roll cage assembly. I actually did this wrong. The vertical aluminum bar there is on backwards, but I'll fix that in a minute. Not before attacking the shocks. Now these shocks were actually updated. These are not the original Rough Rider shocks. They were updated for the Buggy Champ release. They're a little bit simpler, they're a little bit larger in bore from my understanding, but there's still a lot of parts to them. And most of those parts, interestingly enough, just slide around inside of the shock. Now there's no volume compensation on these shocks, so you have to build them with air in them. And if you don't have enough air, then when they compress, they will squirt oil out the bottom. So not the nicest design for the shock, but when they're all assembled like this, they definitely look really good and definitely very vintage. As you start to assemble the rest of the rear end, you connect the shocks that you just built, and here you can see that I've properly aligned the roll bar, so the cage is now installed. And then you can attach the fiberglass main chassis plate and the aluminum chassis stiffener plate that you see here. Moving up to the front, this is installing the cast metal twin trailing suspension arms that go onto a cast metal upright, which also doubles as a shock mount. And then there are axles that go through for the arms to rotate on, and there's a torsion spring on each side. Here's what it looks like a little bit better assembled, and here's the pair of them together. So you can see that those axles that are sticking out are just for the suspension arms to ride on. And here's with the metal, again with the metal steering knuckles installed. Those are actually riding on ball ends, and they made up into plastic bushings on the top and bottom. Here's the whole front end portion of the suspension assembled now. And this is just another view of the same thing. The single servo saver is an interesting piece. It's just not conventional by any means, at least by today's standard, but it does the normal job. It just uses a metal ring. Here it is installed. The metal ring can separate and bend a little bit to provide protection for your servo, and that vertical piece that's attached on top of it, that is just the body mount. And of course, one of the distinguishing features of the Special Racing Buggy series is this radio and electronics tray, which is clear, and it holds all of your electronics plus the steering servo, keeping dust out of it. All that gets closed up with a clear matching top, which is locked down with 4 channel lock bolts, one on each corner, which are very easy to apply and take off. And the entire radio and electronics box assembly gets attached to the chassis with 2 well nuts, which are rubberized to protect the entire assembly from vibration. This is where I get to the wheels. They are 3-piece beadlock wheels. They actually don't need to be glued. And that allows me to get a rolling chassis. Just needs a body to be painted, decals to be applied, body gets mounted up, and then come the rest of the final details, including the driver figure, the headlamps, and the dash. Yes, there's a console. You can barely see it once it gets installed, but it's a nice little detail touch. And here's a close-up of the driver figure all painted up. The body gets attached to the chassis at the rear via this 2-piece spring-loaded clip, and then at the front you just have a single regular body clip. So there it is, the Tamiya Buggy Champ, the 30-year anniversary re-release of the Rough Rider, known by many as the vehicle that started 10th scale electric off-road driving and racing as we know it. You can see all of my high-quality photos of the finished product, as well as box art, pictures of the manuals, pictures of all the parts before any assembly began, and my full write-up about this vehicle at ultimatetamiya.com under Buggies. Hope you enjoy, and I will talk to you again soon.